What is a pilgrimage? What easily comes to mind is some devoted people visiting a holy place to get closer to their religion and religious values. And like in the bedroom, what comes easily often disappoints. Toss that image out of your mind. You see, in Heian period Japan, pilgrims were way less concerned about the afterlife and 100 times more concerned about the before death. It was more than a religious journey, and often their actions went against the teachings of their religion, Buddhism. So pack your vegetarian bento box and let us take a pilgrimage ourselves to the magical and contradictory world of female pilgrimages in Heian, Japan. I'll be your tour guide today, and all it'll cost you is a small fee of 1 like. A lot of our knowledge comes from the diaries of Heian noblewomen. Being educated, these women always strove to be as accurate in their writings as they could possibly have been bothered to be, meaning their writings were biased, sometimes metaphorical, sometimes total fantasy, so like normal diaries. Just letting you know the limitations of our information here. Male pilgrimages were similar, but for women, things hit different. These trips were way more magical for the ladies. First off, how did people pick when and where to go? Well, you wanted to go when the weather was nice, and you wanted to see beautiful views. That's why spring and autumn were peak pilgrimage times. You could see cherry blossoms or colorful leaves. Some Buddhist temples were in season during specific seasons, meaning those were the times you could get maximum spiritual benefit. Today, you can also go on pilgrimage routes in Japan, visiting multiple temples along the way, getting your pilgrimage book signed at each temple. It's a rewarding experience, and totally not what it was like back in Heian, Japan. Nowadays, we have paved roads and trains and polite Japanese people, though maybe not some of the people on trains. But back then, they had rough country paths and impolite Japanese people. Historically, traveling was always hard, unlike today when it's always pleasant and hassle-free. A Heian noblewoman did not usually visit multiple temples at a time. 1 temple per trip was enough, arigato very much, though her party might have made a few overnight stops along the way, like at a friend's place or even at the house of a commoner whom they politely bullied. At that time, Japan had very few inns or other places for travelers to stay. There weren't enough travelers to keep these places in business. The tourism market was basically a few monks wandering the country, preaching the word that, hey, you too can make a living, even if your parents abandoned you in favor of their first son. Most pilgrimages were short and easy trips to temples right outside the capital of Kyoto. There were some popular temples known for granting miracles, like these, but there were also a bunch of small, less-known shrines and temples that dotted the mountains around the capital. The pilgrimage started even before the first step on the road. Leading up to the trip, you had to go through a period of purification. This was harder for the ladies, though. Why? It has something to do with their monthly floods. While purifying, a woman had to create a harmonious, clean, sacred space by lighting incense, performing rituals, and booking a session with Marie Kondo.
This cockroach does not spark joy.
She ate no fish or meat until the end of the pilgrimage, and her attendants did the same. During this time, she paid close attention to dreams because they were thought to foretell her future. Unfortunately for women, the purification process could be messed up if in the middle of it she got her period. That's why women often tried to get their bleeding over with before starting the pilgrimage. But if the bleeding started while at the temple, Buddhist monks were actually very understanding. They understood that it was a natural process of the female body, and that was why they would compassionately request that the woman remove her disgusting-ass impure body from the temple until the bleeding stopped. Despite those annoyances, pilgrimages were magical and moving experiences for women, but mostly not because of anything religious. Their diaries showed that women spent their days being terribly impressed by the most common everyday things. One noble lady entered the mountains outside the city and immediately started crying. Some woodcutters came pulling their carts down from the dark woods above. So new a sight to me that it was almost as if I had been reborn into a different world. Dulled though my emotions had become, I was moved to tears by the beauty of the scene, and my companion even more strongly. Why were women so moved by incredibly boring things? Maybe you can guess from this quote in the Tale of Genji. Though Murasaki was of course familiar enough with the music and dance of the several seasons, she rarely left the house, and had never before been so far from the city. Everything was new and exciting. Heian noble women normally lived lives like Pokemon trapped inside Pokeballs. They pretty much stayed indoors all the time, isolated. A lady was not supposed to be seen in public. One of the few escapes she had from the endless boredom was a pilgrimage. Looking at what they wrote, these trips were less about Buddhism and more about sightseeing or taking a vacation. They were also about something that went totally against the teachings of Buddhism. If there's one desire that Buddha can't shake, it's the desire to tell us to stop caring so much about money and material possessions. And being officially very devout Buddhists, the Japanese elite ignored that advice. Most female pilgrimages only took a few hours, going to a temple outside the capital. Sometimes they would make a trip that took a few days, but even short trips were opportunities to flex your status and wealth. It was proper for a noble woman on a pilgrimage to wear this outfit called a tsuboshozuku, basically a big ol' kimono, an overcoat with a big ol' hat, made to hide every inch and curve of her body from thirsty eyes, like a burqa, but more kawaii. And noble ladies made sure they wore nice ones, because it is a law of the universe that women would judge other women's clothing. One lady, by the name of Sei Shounagon, saw a low-status woman and mentioned that this girl wasn't even wearing a tsuboshozuku. She had just her regular kimono tucked up, the outright scandal. Another lady delivered this savage roast. She had on a somewhat rustic robe of fulled silk and an unlined jacket, and she had put on a great deal of weight. Damn. Researchers have discovered that the other woman is still in the hospital to this day, recovering from that burn. Diaries were full of this kind of clothing talk. A lady couldn't just travel alone. She usually had servants, guards, and a friend or two to talk to, because no one wants to be stuck on a trip talking to the servants every day. You might accidentally catch some empathy. A lady usually sat in a fancy carriage, but sometimes she might travel on foot, or even on horseback. Rarely, though. I can understand avoiding the carriage. It was just a smaller, wobblier version of the same room she had been trapped in back home. The higher a lady's rank, the more flamboyant her parade. The roads were more dangerous than your browser history, and nice places to stay were rare. You can imagine the hardship. What if you needed to go number 2? Luckily, women don't poop, so they didn't have to worry about that. Pilgrimage parties sometimes had to sleep at the home of random commoners. It could get scary. In one incident, a group of nobles found themselves stuck in the middle of nowhere one evening. In the distance, they saw a cottage, and if they squinted a bit, they could almost see in front of it the word sketchy. The group reluctantly knocked on the door. 2 men answered, claiming their master was on a trip, but said the nobles could stay. That night, as the travelers slept, the 2 men stayed up and kept walking around the house. One noble woman couldn't sleep from the noise, got suspicious, and asked the men what they were doing sneaking about the whole night. The 2 men replied, "Good heavens, we can't possibly go to sleep. Here we are putting up people we know nothing about. What would happen to us if you made off with the cauldron?" I knew I hated peasants. But really, long pilgrimages could be unsafe. You might actually end up in your next life. For those who didn't want to risk running into bandits or evil spirits, but still wanted their prayers answered, there was a solution. In one case, a young lady wanted to visit a faraway temple, but her mother was having none of it. She didn't raise her daughter all these years just for the girl to get kidnapped on the road by some horny fox spirit. The mother allowed her daughter to go to a safer, nearby temple. The problem was, short-range prayers yielded short-range blessings. What could she do? Luckily, money is the root of all solutions. Mommy hired a priest to visit the faraway temple in her daughter's place. The priest was a substitute pilgrim, like an Uber Eats for miracles. It was pretty common. So, after dodging bandits and avoiding lusty foxes, what did people do at the temple? Well, temples were sacred places, welcomed to all, nobles and commoners alike. In their normal lives, the elites rarely interacted with regular people, so temples were a great place for the upper class to practice ignoring them in person like they were background scenery. Once at the temple, a noble woman spent 1 to a few days in isolation, reciting scripture. The monks really knew how to treat a lady. For women of high status, they put up screens to give her an enclosure, a private space. Murasaki Shikibu wrote the first chapter of the Tale of Genji at a temple called Ishiyama-dera in her own private space. After isolation, a lady spent her days praying in the main hall and nights in her private area, where she could listen to the monks recite sutras. What did they do at night? You might think sleep. But no, people tried really hard to stay awake because they said you were more likely to get dreams of the future if you slept from exhaustion. One woman dreamed that a monk poured water on her right knee, shocking her awake. She concluded that it must have been a bad sign from the Buddha. Ah yes, nothing says bad luck like a wet knee. This is why plumbers charge an arm and a leg. They know they're one leak away from leukemia. A private space was basically playing fort with screens. It wasn't exactly soundproof, but although you could hear sounds from other spaces next door, pilgrims didn't communicate much with each other. It seems people mostly wanted to be left alone, and they especially didn't want to mingle with the commoners. Once, Lady Seisho Nagon was trying to get to her private space, but there were commoners in her way. She wrote, "They looked like so many basket worms as they crowded together in their hideous clothes." Visitors normally stayed 3 to 7 days. The monks didn't ask for money, but since they provided food, shelter, and targeted prayers, pilgrims were expected to offer donations, and nobody wanted to look stingy in front of Buddha. A disciplined mind provides happiness, but a cheap wallet can't provide diddly squat. Now, from the time leading up to the pilgrimage to the time they spent in the temple, pilgrims showed their religious devotion in a lot of ways. They did rituals of purification, ate vegetarian, and stayed away from alcohol. But the instant they waved goodbye to the monks, things totally flipped. It's like how people think that because they exercised, it's okay for them to eat a pizza afterwards. Well, the return trip was when the shenanigans started. Fasting turned into feasting, and prayers turned into maybe visiting a lover or two. The journey home might take longer than the journey there, because nobles often got invitations from friends and local lords to come to their place and party it up. It was common for pilgrims to get home and then have a big old feast, handing out gifts and temple charms. No one was worried if this went against the religious nature of a pilgrimage. Now all this talk about prayers, and I haven't yet told you what they prayed for. If you thought they mostly wished for religious things like a good afterlife, you're going to be surprised. Click here to see the things they actually prayed for that had nothing to do with Buddhism. We have a new emperor on Patreon this time, the real Linfamy. Wait, what? I'm a fraud. We also have some regular patrons, Eva, Featherbound. Featherbound books sound awesome. CJ Miller, and Marthmellow. Thanks so much, you guys. Alright, I love you, and spread the knowledge.